Hello, it's Paul Rivoche. I'm a professional comic book artist and animation artist. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some ideas about comic book cover design, both past and present. So there's been a real change, I think, in the way that comic book covers are done. And I'll get into some different aspects, both of the past and the present. See, in the present, it seems like the trend is mostly towards what you could call pin-up covers for the most part, although there are varieties. But that would be covers where you have mostly kind of posing. You have superheroes, demonstrating their muscles. Not so much of a story situation, which is really what the older covers presented. And I'm going to go into some examples here. So this video is really to give people who are working on covers, maybe they're learning about that and thinking about what to do. It's really food for thought. It's not meant to be a definitive review of all the covers that are being done. And I'm actually not going to present current ones because I think most people will really know what I mean by pin-up covers. And again, it's really when you have mostly just posing, like you have your characters like on a mountaintop or whatever, and they're like all heroic, and sometimes they're interacting a little bit, sometimes they're fighting a little bit, but there really isn't a concerted effort to show a specific storytelling moment. And when I get into showing some of these older covers, I think you'll see that almost all of them, that was this style. Now, I guess I'll reveal my biases. I definitely prefer those because I just find them more interesting. I mean, there's can be ones that are what you call the posing covers that are interesting, but I guess it gets a bit the same after a while. And I think what you could say too about it is that for people who aren't familiar with the characters, like say you get a drive-by person, which you could call somebody who's like a casual reader. Like in the old days when comics were distributed much more widely, they'd be on a spinner rack in a drugstore, which is where I saw them as a kid, or the local news shop. People who aren't familiar already with existing series, you want them to be drawn in. So somebody going by and they say, oh, what's that? Like a kid or a teenager, whoever. They might see this scene of these older covers and then just be grabbed by it. Whereas the newer ones, I guess you could say that happens too. But for me at least, I find that there maybe isn't as much meat, So I'm going to go over here to my, this is a folder I have of Neal Adams covers. And Neal Adams is, he recently passed away, but he was a wonderful artist. And I really personally prefer his covers the best. I mean, I like lots of things of what he did, but I really think that in this period, which is the late 60s and 70s, he just did incredible cover work. So I'm gonna kind of talk about some aspects of what I see as I scroll through these, and then move on to some other covers by David Mazzucchelli, which are kind of a bit of a contrast, but not a complete break. So yeah, let's just pick some of these at random. What you always have is what I call a story suspense moment, all in one image. So it's what it does is it gives you all the pieces of a very dramatic situation. It could be something that's about to happen. It could be something that's in the middle of happening, or it could be something that just happened and it's kind of the aftermath. But what you have is the delight of the comics medium, which is you have words and pictures combined to create a unified or like a synthesis of those two, creates a fuller meaning that you wouldn't get either from the words or the pictures. And that's really the inherent delight to me of the comics medium. It's what I discovered when I was a little kid. I think most people do. It's this unique hybrid of words and pictures. So in these older covers, you can see that they much more used more copy. That's one thing I see in a lot of comics now, and particularly indie comics, but even mainstream, although I don't examine those as much anymore. You had really an interesting mix, sometimes to excess, sometimes more restrained, of words and pictures. So here is Batman accusing members of the UN. I accuse Superman of the most evil deed in history, and I'll prove that it as soon as this man takes off his mask. Batman's lying. So you got Superman and Batman arguing over this figure. Now, what you get into, though, is you can get into a question of how much is too much, like how much copy should you have. Like there's people who are in the modern scene. I think that comics has veered much more towards illustration as much as it has left behind some aspects of cartooning. And I think here, this might even be a little much. Like modern readers might say, oh, I don't want to read that whole word balloon before getting the meaning. But clearly in these older covers, without the words, you wouldn't have the full context. And I'm going to kind of review this later with some notes I made, but that's a little more technical and scientific, so I wanted to get to some visual stuff first. But anyway, you got old buddies, Superman and Batman, arguing, and the idea is to hook the reader and draw them in. It's like, what's going on? And we don't have to really linger on any one particular one. This one's kind of small here, but you got extra Supermans. And it says here, you must die like these two Supermen before you. So what's going on? That one's a little busy maybe, right? And you can see here they've added this word block here just as if it's pasted right over. It's kind of in the scene because it's drawn in perspective, aligning with the image, but you don't know if it's meant to be literally there in the room or if it's just a box that we see as the reader floating in front. Then there's ones like this, and these are slightly from different eras perhaps. But again, you have a much simpler, very powerful image. What's his name, Scott? I'm not as up as some of the real fans on the Marvel stuff. I was more of a DC kid, but you've got one of those guys called the Sentinels, and they're attacking. There's 3 of them. He's surrounded. And so this is the last X-Man. So without that text, you don't have the full context. You have an interesting scene. He's fighting these monsters, but it's telling you he's down to the last one. So it's adding that little extra piece of information. And again, when I get here later to my analysis, what I'm going to say, this is like a sneak peek, is you can glean from looking at these that whether they did it consciously or not, and Jack Kirby was a great one for this too, you could almost summarize the covers in a 2 or 3 word premise. Like this is The Last Stand, and then you have ones like The Hidden Enemy or, About to Be Surprised, There's all kinds of like simple ways that you can categorize this sort of story moment that you would have appearing in the picture. So this could be a whole category here, like The Last Stand type situation or premise or theme, and you can find all kinds of variations on that. So once you think of it that way, you can start categorizing different covers you see, and you'll see that formulas repeat, but not exactly. And this is just a different kind of thing. It's dominated by these letters and lettering. So this is an interesting one actually, because when I talk about David Mazzucchelli later, I'll show you that he used a lot of symbolic elements. And some of these earlier covers do use that, but not as many. Because, I should sketch that in as the scope of what I'm talking about here. I'm saying I'm contrasting more modern, usual pinup covers where they're not bothering as much with story on one hand versus the older covers that did have literal story situations. And then I'm going to contrast through all of them, literal versus symbolic kind of elements. So here you have these floating LL, and you have Superman on the ground. And I guess he's being threatened by these letters, but you're not 100% sure is this a literal moment in a real world situation? There's no background. Superman's clearly hurt. But does it literally mean that there's 2 letters that are floating in the room and they're threatening him? Or has it been symbolized? It looks to me like it's been more symbolized. And so the cover's strength comes from this grabber moment, but it's not depending on a literal scene like, 2 superheroes fighting. The meaning has been created by adding all this lettering, which has been done as a graphic element, which is another part of many of these covers, is that there's an integration of the very decorative or creative lettering put into covers in various ways. And again, I think that's kind of gone out of vogue somewhat, but I love it. It's what grabbed me as a kid. We'll move on here. Clark, I was right, you're Superboy. So we've got one of those bunch of guns in the foreground type covers that Joe Kubert did tons of with Sergeant Rock, which I'm not showing any examples of here. There's way too many, obviously, comic covers to ever cover all of them. But I'm really trying to stir thought with this video, or stimulate thought. It's like how you can think about covers as a kind of recipe of elements. I'm not focusing so much in my talk here about the drawing and then the nuances of that. That would be for another video. It's really about the soup, like how you make, how you mix the elements and talk about that overall thing, because that's really a huge part of the success or failure of a cover, at least in its function, to draw a reader in and get them to buy the comic, which was the function of these comics back then, because they're on the newsstand. And like I said, they were sometimes from uninitiated readers. They weren't necessarily fans, which is a valid point to introduce. I guess when you're talking about crowdfunded comics, you do have to get into that nuance that they're probably more pre-sold in a way. So they may not depend as much on that component of hooking the uninitiated reader and grabbing them so strongly that they go, oh, I got to find out. I didn't know much about Superboy, but look at him. He's being riddled with bullets. And obviously this came out at the time of Bonnie and Clyde. So there's a Arthur Hill directed, or was it Arthur Penn? Arthur Penn, I think it was. Movie purists, don't bust me. But I'm pretty sure it is with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. There's a movie done of Bonnie and Clyde. And I guess the comics people are always watching movies. Nowadays it goes the other way because movie people watch comics. But back then I guess the comics people were watching the movies, so they got Superboy in the situation. And the teaser here is, for I guess this would be aimed at existing fans, is Superboy's secret identity going to be revealed? And we'll look at a few more. As I said, I love Neal Adams. He really nailed these components. And I think probably, again, the real people up on this would tell me that, I don't know my comics history well enough. Was it Carmen Infantino back then, or Julia Schwartz who were overseeing this? But I guess Carmen Infantino at some point was in there probably doing layouts. And I don't know, again, the details of did Neal Adams actually follow all of them. But anyway, we've got Bouncing Boy here in the Legion of Superheroes. I defeated you, Legionnaires. You know the penalty. Rip off your emblems. Yes, Bouncing Boy, we've proved you're the mightiest of all. So this is symbolically staged. You've got Bouncing Boy higher up on some kind of, what is that, platform? It's not really clear. There's curtains there for no good reason. I guess he could have left those out as an element behind. But they're tearing off their emblems. They're all downcast. Their heads are down. And he's got his arms crossed, and he's very confrontational. So it's a very interesting moment. And again, you need the word balloons to get the full meaning, because if you made a file where you took those out, it would just be him standing there, and they're just like tearing their shirts, but you don't know why. Here you're intrigued because there's a penalty. And let's go for some more. They're all very great graphic and grabby. Great graphic and grabby. So here we have kids about to fall. Superboy, please, I've paid you what you wanted. Now save my child from that ledge before she falls. Some of them, verge into cheesy in this period, because here you've got Superboy doing the lingo of the late 60s, the hippie stuff. Relax, Pops. I'll do it after we count this beautiful cash. What put the greed in Superman's eyes? Read Heroes for Hire. So that's a sign pasted in the background, because instead of doing like a blurb on top, they pasted it in the background, which is kind of interesting. It's like built into the background. Let's look at this one. You've got Brainiac. What is he called in the Legion? Brainiac 5? I should know. I read all these comics and loved them as a kid, although maybe not these ones. Some of the early ones. But anyway, hurry up with our will, Superboy, before the hourglass in our lives run out. Doing my best, Brainy, but I'm too weak. My finger can hardly scratch this steel. So that's interesting. They've got a deadline. Like, that could be a category of our cover premises. Hourglass almost empty, you could call it. Time's running out, you could call it, right? So I find it's useful and interesting to try and boil it down into very simple 2, 3, or maximum 4-word premises or themes, like what is the basic core concept of this that grabs people? And it has to be something dramatic, dangerous, interesting, something with conflict, contrast, drama. It's what everybody wants, right? You can't just, have Superman taking a nap. You could have Superman or Superboy taking a nap, but you have to have an anvil poised above him about to fall with tiny string breaking, or, someone looming over him or whatever. I'm just giving an example of, you need 2 or 3 components usually. And then sometimes on these older covers, the vital piece or component of context that's, again, like a soup that you're mixing all together, was the captions and the word balloons. And that would give you the full thing together, and you go, oh, I've got to find out what happens there. This is imminent death, specter of the stalking swamp. You don't really get context from that. That's just a title, but it's more an interesting graphic feature. But you've got innocent woman who's looking at her boyfriend. They're up to no good in the swamp. Why they're in the swamp, who knows? Is that an ideal location there, Fred? But I don't know. And you've got what is it? Is that the proto-swamp thing? I don't know. Again, comics readers know their history. And I keep scrolling through these, and I'm going to switch over to my Photoshop files. Because there's all kinds of different ones here, And I'm sure the comics readers will see the very famous ones. Like, this is a pretty famous one. Great Batman cover by Neal Adams. The Demon Lives Again. So here we've got Superman. That was approved by the Comics Code Authority? Was it really? Look at that. It's got the seal of this Comics Code that had to approve covers for a while until they ditched it. But I'm wondering, he's got a saber that's looks like it's stuck into him. Although they've fudged it a bit because you can't tell if it's in the ground. But they've taken his costume, as many people have pointed out about this cover. He's got double pants because I guess they couldn't leave him nude. But the bad guy, what's his name, Ra's al Ghul, has taken, he's been defeated and he's had his uniform ripped off except for his cowl. But he's taken Batman's costume, but of course he's still got pants there. So I guess that's a coloring mistake, because probably Neal would have intended this for that to be his leg, not the Batman costume. But anyway, that's a sidebar. That's just fun. But here again, what do we have? We have a story suspense moment, very dramatically presented. As always in these covers, the challenge is to present the characters' faces, like the players, their faces. So here he's tipped his head back, so we can see Batman's open mouth, and he's either dead or in agony about to die. And this guy's there mercilessly. The camel train is going to go off in the distance and leave poor Batman behind. Let's look at one or two others for that aspect of the players. So you can't always show all the faces, because if you have a front-back view, it's like in movies. If the camera's square on and you're looking at something, you can see their face and their expressions. But when you're behind one of the characters looking at the other confrontation, you've got a two-shot. You've got to actually usually turn the characters' faces enough, if you want, say here, this foreground guy, Hot Wheels guy, to see some expression. He might in reality be turned even further straight towards the background character. But what they do in movies, I can't demonstrate here, I don't have a second camera, but what they apparently do in movies, and you can do it in comics, you discover that you have to, is you actually turn the character a little back towards the camera so you can see enough of his face. Like he's done it here with Robin. Robin might actually have his head turned more away, but of course then you can't see his expression. So all you have in the flat two-dimensional surface of the comic is the viewer can't like sneak around and see Robin's face. So you have to, whatever they're going to get from your cover, you have to present it clearly. And that's what he's done here. He's got Robin turned enough. He's got the album cover And again, this is another famous, the Paul is dead thing that happened back then, which is an ongoing thing, actually. I talked to Mike Williams' channel about this, the Paul is dead, Billy Shear's conspiracy for the buffs among us who dig into these different things. But Batman's saying, here they come, they're in a spooky graveyard. One of them is dead, but which one? The clue is on their album cover. So this is an allusion to that when that whole thing was happening. And like I said, the comics picked up on not only movies, but past current events. And I guess here there's no other dramatic component other than we're wondering alongside them which one is the dead one. I guess that was enough to sell a comic back then. So here's a good one of against, the hero vanquished, the hero brought low. And I forget this guy's name, Parasite, right? It says right there, Paul. I gave you 2 black eyes, Superman. Now I'm going to bust your note. That's all you're going to do to Superman? That's a little tame by modern standards. Nowadays they'd have it, I'm going to tear your head off. But I guess this is aimed more at a tamer time, and they were aiming at a little kid, so they didn't want to shock them the way they do now. And we've got gore, we've got demons, we've got people being torn apart routinely, we've got gore flying everywhere, so people are unshockable. So you have to go to new levels of shockery to shock the unshockable. But here you've got this word caption box, blurb, I guess they call it maybe, on a tilt angle here to go along with the action. And that's interesting. Like, it's just a design thing. If you visualize this, I should have probably prepared, there's no should, but I could have prepared examples where I manipulate this. But if you think about this with this box square on, it's more boring. So whoever designed this, they said, oh, we're going to paste that in on top of the art, we're going to tilt it. And it gives it more dynamism. Here's another Neal Adams classic cover, a lot quieter. There's just the one box here. And I think this is when they were having the price war. So comics went from, like, I remember the earliest 5 cents to whatever, was it 10 and 12 cents, 15 cents, 25 cents? And they got bigger and bigger. They're adding reprints in. Excuse me. So I guess they wanted to alert the kid to buy it because you got an extra. But it does kind of, this is a cover that probably didn't even need much, because this background poster that Neal's added in here, Wanted for Murder, Batman, explains the whole thing and gives you the context of why this guy's firing the rifle and about to shoot. So this one you could class under a premise of like imminent death, about to die moments. So it's like a moment, right? It's like a frozen moment where you see it all in one image and it pulls you in. And again, this yellow box is really distracting, so that's unfortunate. There's so many more I could look at here, but I'm going to switch over to my Photoshop, and I'm going to start talking here about David Mazzucchelli, because he, I think, is just a genius level artist too, and I think that he must have learned all of this stuff from the greats, and I'm sure he had input from editorial. And in fact, an artist, you have to work with what you're given. You're sometimes given parameters, guidelines of the type of cover or type of final look, not only the art style, but the components. So here, I've made some notes here for myself. And I'll as we go along here, I'll sort of contrast some of the examples. So, and I've done it in a sort of a rough sliding scale from somewhat more literal to somewhat more symbolic. So here I've said it's a literal cover with minimal background. Strong, simple situation, few elements. So you've just got Matt Murdock in his other civilian clothes, and he's all burned out. And he's in an alley, it looks like. That's all you get to go from. You can assume that because there's the 2 black bars, but it looks like bricks on the right side. And snow falling. You've got a Santa with Christmas bells. You know it's Santa, but he's got a knife. It's Santa. So, and that's it though. He hasn't, excuse me, he hasn't given you anything else. Just falling snow, and it's really stripped down. And you'll see he does that in a lot of covers, and it's very powerful because, of course, the more elements you put in a cover or in a drawing or in a comic, it applies to a page. The more things are competing for attention. So it's like, you know, listening to a three-piece rock and roll trio versus a whole symphony orchestra, right? The orchestra arrangement is much more complicated because you have to juggle all those things. You can't have them all play at once. So I said you could describe this premise as facing attack or cornered by danger, you know, or I could say about to die if he loses. So it's Christmas, a happy time, but this is a nasty Santa. So that conflict, that inherent thing grabs you. A suspense moment has been created using the simple contrast. We want to know what will happen next, right? So it's a story suspense moment. We want to open the book and see how he's going to get out of this crazy situation. And the hand and knife have been featured. He didn't even need to show Santa or an expression. You know, you could have done that, but it's not necessary. This pulls you right in. So on this one, it's a mostly literal cover again, in the sense that there is a background presented. There's these three characters in action. I find this one maybe the tiniest bit weaker because there's a big empty space here. Not that you have to fill everything up, but there's a bit of equalism going on, although, you know, who am I to say? It's still very powerful. I love it, but I would say that maybe. Mostly literal cover, very simple BG, allows us to focus on the characters. The silhouettes are great. The moment of the explosion is shown, not before or after. And the premise, like I said, is about to die, or reinforced by the one word Armageddon. So here, unlike the ones I'm going to show in a moment, the type is not really built into the, in interacting with the characters. So you've just got the type pasted on the bottom, but it does give context. It becomes a graphic element more than just a word delivery vehicle, though, which is, yeah, it's not just like a smaller or in a box. Would the cover work without that word, I ask myself. And that's something you can always do is, you know, is it plus it or minus it? When you put something in, whether it be a storyboard, a cover design, a panel, a figure, it can apply to anything. You're always doing additive and subtractive. You're saying, if I was to take this out, does the whole thing collapse like a house of cards that was built up? Or is it just more, you know, slathering on of excess gravy? Like, that won't get you anywhere, particularly when you're designing the premise of a cover. You should really think carefully, is it worth being there? If it is worth being there, how important should it be in the hierarchy of things? Because if you make everything too equal, each thing gets watered down and becomes equal, and the viewer is not going to know what to look at exactly. So here, that's what I said is a minor criticism, is these three figures are kind of equal, so you're not really sure where to look. And in fact, the Daredevil and Armageddon are a bit equal. It's still great. I mean, I'm not dissing it. It's something I should really be careful to point out for people that aren't used to this, is that there's a big difference. Yeah, I should say this for the modern fighty drama, internet, online world, is you can analyze things critically, but it doesn't mean you hate. You're not a hater. You're just an analyzer. And then some people will say, well, why do you need to be an analyzer, Paul? Just draw. Okay, so if you're a genius cover artist, or you're David Mazzucchelli, I'd love to have him here and ask him, how much did you think about it? I'm pretty sure, actually, he thought about this really carefully. But even if he's a genius who doesn't, like, it doesn't have to be David Mazzucchelli. If it rolls off your hand and mind and just onto the paper without any thought, great. But for most people, they have to do various iterations of a cover. That's where the thinking comes in. It's like you draw, maybe you're not thinking so much, but then you step back, or the next day you get up and you're all like excited. Oh, I did the greatest thing ever. And you look at it and you're like, oh, that's not so good. There's something wrong. And you get that nagging feeling. Well, you should listen to that, because that's your artistic intuition. Just like in real life, if you have real life intuition telling you something, you should listen to it and try and figure out what it is that you need to change. And that's where the analysis, whatever level of an analysis that you've built up in yourself, that's where it comes in, because you have to decide what to change, and you want to change things that improve it, not things that degrade it and make it even worse. And we've all done that too, where you start monkeying with it and then you come back the next day again and it's like, oh, it's even worse than ever. And you go back and look at the one you did that was pretty good but had some flaws that was bugging you. You go, oh, that one was better. So then you got to backtrack. And this is something you can particularly get into nowadays with computers and variations that you can do. It's very seductive. So that again all points to having a tool within yourself that's like a analysis where you can actually have a basis on which you make decisions. That's sort of what I'm trying to give you here, or get into, how to think about covers, particularly these older covers. So on this one I said, and these are all, I think, in this, most of these are in this, the Born Again series, aren't they? But they're not in order because it looks like he's using different levels of this symbolic versus literal stuff in these different covers. He kind of fades in and out with it. Another very strong, clear, simple cover. Obvious action and violence, that's going to pull you in. This one is part literal and part symbolic. The type and I said that because the type becomes part of the image, and it's a strong design element. So it says saved. And this may presuppose that the viewer who bought this cover and looked at it was already familiar with the series and they were buying them on an ongoing basis. So they want to know how he's saved. And of course they wouldn't know. I think, as far as it's been a while since I read this brilliant Born Again series. I've got to reread it, note to self. But I'm pretty sure this is Matt Murdock, and then there's this other daredevil that turns up and starts beating the crap out of him. So then you go, well, why is he saved? Because it doesn't look like he's being saved. So just putting that big title there is going to grab you, and it adds a new context, which is what I put in this note here. And it was either Mazzucchelli, I assume, who designed this, or whoever he's working with. I don't know that part of it, but let's credit him. He used a nice spatter effect again, which I like, and they built the type behind, which is cool because it's almost like interactive. And it's not full Will Eisner, like in The Spirit, where he'd have the spirit walking around like giant letters that are buildings or whatever, but it's kind of more to that, more towards that. The type is a graphic element. And again, if you removed this, the thing, it wouldn't completely fall apart, but you'd have a lot of blank area. So it's all been built carefully to work together as one unit. And here, this cover is moving more into the symbolic. The figure is active and about to strike, but there isn't, he isn't actually beating anybody. He's really threatening you, the viewer, almost. It's like a standoff. But there's no literal background because it isn't really necessarily meant that he's, like, we can know this or assume this when we look at this, that it's symbolic. Because I think even a younger reader would go, okay, it's not like he's in front of a flag that's got a wall of flame, or it could be even the flag kind of burning, but it looks like a wall of flame. And then there's these eyes, which are the villain, and there's, the flag's the stars and stripes. So it's not meant to be literal. It's a combination of a literal drawing, because not like a cutout drawing. It's a literal drawing of Daredevil, but it's got a symbolic backdrop that's going behind it. And I wrote that here in the notes, as you can see. Well, I guess they're partly cut off there, aren't they, in my screen share here. But I said, once more, the type is an integral part of the design, besides supplying intriguing context. And it doesn't need Photoshop supercolor to be powerfully striking. So, people just overcolor covers nowadays. Like, if you have a good, and sometimes I know it's brutal, but it's true. We've all done it. It's an attempt to compensate, just like if you haven't done the previous stage properly, then you overcompensate in the next stage. And often it becomes a vain attempt to make, silk purse out of a sow's ear. There's all kinds of old sayings for these situations. Because if you haven't got your concept worked out, you over pencil and you just go crazy penciling, trying to make it work. But if it's bugging you, and you still have that nagging feeling, usually what you find, this is one of the truisms I've found in my almost 50-year career doing this stuff, is go back to the earlier stage, because that nagging thing, like if the penciling's not working, go back to the concept. If the inking's not working and you're just inking and inking, trying to make it look good, and then you start over and re-ink the same drawing, usually it's because the pencil drawing, even if the concept worked, the next stage, which is the pencil drawing, has got big problems. And you need to rearrange something, because no amount of cool inking is going to make a poorly composed cover better. It is because the flaw is inherent in the composition. And it's the same with color. No amount of great color and Photoshop layers and fading and all this, if the basic earlier stages are not well worked out, then you're not going to put the final layer of the cake on by adding too much color. It's just going to be a desperate attempt to kind of polish the same you-know-what. So that's my rant about, is it a rant? I don't know. It's my commentary, which is all coming from things I've learned myself from making all these mistakes. That's my commentary about stages. But God and Country, he's stepping over the lettering, which is very cool. And it's just great. It's symbolic and it's kind of interactive. And it asks a question like, doing it for God and country, what's it all about? So that's going to be answered in the comics. So you pick this up and buy it. And this is the last one of the Mazzucchelli ones I'm going to show here. This is not the last in the series, but I think it's probably the first one, right? Again, the comics purists will slay me for not knowing this, but this covers a good example of mixed literal and symbolic elements. Like I said, he kind of goes back and forth because the figure and the desk are literal, but the daredevil silhouette is not necessarily realistic or literal like in that room. It could be, but because there's no other background shown, it becomes powerfully symbolic, which is effective. He's stripped out any of the other stuff, and we just get this strong red grabbing us from a distance. Daredevil overshadows everything. Will he be born again from weakness into a powerful hero? On this one, the type is functional and not woven into the image. Yeah, so he wasn't really doing an interactive thing like putting the born again type on the desk or whatever. So, okay, now I'm going to go to the notes section of my video presentation where I'm going to go over this. So this is not me showing pictures, but me talking, but I'm going to read this out. So I know it's a little more dull, but this really should cement it, because that's the main point of this video, is to throw this concept into people's heads and see what you want, if anything you want to do with it, because I like these older covers, and I think they're very powerful, and I think we've left something behind when we don't use any of these techniques. So here's my notes. The older comic book covers were very different to many or most modern ones. Modern ones are mostly collages of muscle-bound characters posing with their muscles. Often they display muscle-bound demonic characters, whether they're heroes or villains. That's just like a sidebar. That's my main thing. It's like, I want more variety, but hey, I guess the backbench is going to yell at me, do it yourself, Paul, or I'm working on it. They're very often intended as displays of illustration prowess to wow fans, fancy inking, Photoshop colors, dazzling everything. In other words, the fancy drawing is the selling point, rather than hooking the viewer with story. The end, or like the intended end purpose of it, is the cool drawing, instead of the cool drawing being the vehicle to deliver the story, which is only, so the drawing is only the means to the end in this other conception of, like the one in my number 2 down here, the older school covers. Here I'm talking the number 1. I should have put a label here. These are just the pin-up covers I'm talking about, the more modern ones. So yeah, I said it here. These can be generally called pin-up covers. They leave most or all of the story and cartooning elements of the older covers behind, the word balloons, dazzle captions, boxes, blurbs, etc. Sometimes there's a setting that is clearly shown in these modern pin-up covers. Other times it's only hinted at. Often the backgrounds are vague or entirely absent. Usually these covers amount to a series of disconnected fragments, but they don't fit together into a picture or story moment, and they're not intended to. So again, if you don't want to do that, then don't do it. I am biased here, and this is my opinion about what I like. So for the reader, it's like throwing a bunch of puzzle pieces randomly onto a table. I guess I'm going to interrupt myself for a moment to say, one of the main things I'm realizing as I'm talking about presenting this is part of my plea would be for having a reason why you do things. So sometimes you see these modern covers and it's like they're bridging two stools. They're partly sort of a pin-up cover, but they're also kind of hinting that they have a story in there, a story moment like I was demonstrating with these older covers. But I don't think they've decided clearly, and they haven't actually rationalized this whole so they understand what they're doing. And I'm saying you should pick a lane. You should say, I'm doing a pin-up cover. It's going to be amazing. The inking is going to be amazing. I have the muscles on the mountaintop with the beams behind them, or the sun, or a giant explosion. You know, it's the frozen moment, whatever it is. But that's all it is. And again, I showed with Mazzucchelli, sometimes he did a mixture because he had some really cool poses with those Daredevil covers. But there were enough story components and symbolic things to kind of create an intrigue that was extra beyond just the pose. What I see in a lot of modern covers is they just have the pose. Whether it's well done or not is kind of beside the point of my discussion here, but they just have the posing. But there are no other elements, and often very few type or cover elements. So you don't really know, like, where's the beef? You know, where's the appeal, the hook, to really hook you in like a fish hook, to grab you and you're going to be grabbed if you love that artist, if you're collecting one of the modern artists, or even if it's like somewhat older ones like Jim Lee or whatever that still do pin-up covers. I haven't looked at what he's doing lately, so it's not a commentary on him. But if you like that, then fine. But I just think that sometimes it's confusing, particularly for readers who aren't already a fan, because they can't tell what's going on if you look at a cover that hasn't been worked out. And again, if you want to do a story moment cover, then really work it out and present something like they did so well in those older covers. And obviously there were hundreds and hundreds I could have gone on to show, but that would be a 20-hour video. So for the reader, it's like throwing a bunch of puzzle pieces randomly onto a table. Without prior knowledge, often nothing clear could be deciphered about the storyline or a specific moment in the story. And then now in number 2 here, I'm talking about the older covers, the story covers. The older covers did something completely different. They gave the viewer, even a casual one, enough pieces all at once to figure out from one image what was happening almost instantly. It's called read at a glance. You could just glance at it and just like be pulled right in. In other words, these covers usually told a story, even a minimal one. They gave the viewer enough to go by to figure out what was happening and be grabbed by it, hooked. So the basic structure of the older covers was this. They clearly show a situation, an event, or a moment that is important and or dangerous. This event either is about to happen, and I called that suspense from uncertainty because it's just down the road in time from the moment we're at in the cover. Something's just about to happen. So it's like the banana peel joke, the classic gag about show the banana peel. It's like a comedian thing, apparently. Again, some viewers may know this well. It's like the whole thing was about like show the banana peel down the road, show the guy walking, show the guy closer, and you're setting up the gag, the suspense, because you can see that he's about to get, something's going to happen. Then he slips on the banana peel. That's the moment, and then he falls, boom, and then maybe something else happens. But that's the idea of before, event, and after, which I'm presenting here. As you can use that as another kind of analytical tool, looking at all those older covers, because it's another way of like organizing them. You could say they fall into these different categories. So something was about to happen. That's suspense and interest created from, there isn't somebody being punched yet, but they're about to be punched, or they're about to slip on the banana peel from the joke. So if something is happening, conflict, battle, destruction, suspense about the outcome then is what you're going to be drawn by, because if your hero's in a slugfest with the other guy, if Darkseid's fighting Orion on the cover and they're at each other's throats, the suspense for the kid viewer like me who is buying the Do Gods is like, who's going to prevail? So you're right in the middle of the thick of battle. And then the next one is in time, and these are all dealing with time, obviously, like I said, because you're dealing with moments. So the time of something that just happened, the aftermath. The suspense is what now? Like, are they dead? I didn't pull it up here, but there's that famous cover of the Fantastic Four that Jack Kirby did, and Sue Storm is the only one left there standing, and she's like this, and the giant, whatever, sentinel or something. the FF are all on the ground, the other three men, and she's the last one, so she's being threatened. So that's like female in danger and, last woman standing. And it's an after moment, though. Something has happened, and then something more is going to happen, but the big thing just happened, and you're sitting there going, oh, what's going to happen to our heroine? So the older covers would create a story, suspense, conflict moment all in one image, and combine that with cover copy that is exciting and dramatic and adds to the narrative. The cover blurbs and captions would add context and info, completing the scenario. The result is a compelling story all in one image that compels the viewer to buy and read the comic book. So there I pretty much hammered home, we've got, I think, about 49, 50 minutes here. That's really the main thing I wanted to present. Let me just see if I've got anything else. I think we did that one. Well, these are Kirby covers. I was going to do a draw over, but I'm going to save that for another video. But these are fantastic, Fantastic Four, but they're fantastic covers that he did. So many. This is not particularly an important one compared to others. There's so many brilliant ones, but you can see that the challenge here is when you have a team book, you've got a lot more figures. And then, of course, the real challenge that he did so well on so many covers is you not only have the Fantastic Four, which he didn't show the rest of them there, but he has here a team of villains, the Inhumans. You've got Black Bolt, who is it? Triton, Medusa, Karnak, Gorgon, and oh, is that, what's her name from, see, again, the aging brain hits me. What's her name? Is that his girlfriend? What's his name? Oh, her name. What's her name? Anyway, we won't bog down in that, but he's got a very big figure here, the Torch, and he's got him fighting off alone. So it's like, what's your premise there? How do you summarize that in 3 words? Let's actually go over here to my notes number 2 that I forgot to present, actually, which relates exactly to that, though, so it worked out well. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's, again, a very useful tool, sometimes to switch over to words and abstract things when you're struggling with the design. Because it's like that recipe where you could make, 3 columns of like character, setting, and props or vehicles, and cross-connect them and come up with interesting new things that you didn't think of drawing. So it's a similar kind of thing that if you put things in words, you can jog yourself out of being stuck on, like locking down on just messing around with an image, but you're just not getting anywhere if you're trying to work out a cover. So here I put categories of cover premises, or it could be themes. And my note was to myself was show visual examples, which I've been doing through here. You could distill these older covers down into simple themes or premises. It's fun to describe them in only 2 or 3 words. Repetitive categories or formulas. For example, the unseen threat. That could be like ambush, the bad guy's around the corner, he's hiding with a gun, and there's somebody about the good guy, maybe somebody about to come around the corner, and they're not seeing each other yet. So it's a before moment, or it could be the reverse. It could be not the bad guy hiding, it could be the good guys hiding. And then it could be there's another one, you could say the obvious threat, surrounded by guns, confronted by villain, and I'll show a Johnny Remita cover in a second, actually. The superior enemy, the giant threat, and a smaller hero, like Galactus fighting the Fantastic Four or whoever it might be. And you're so outnumbered and outmatched that, the suspense is like, what's going to happen? Then there's a whole category of covers that Kirby did, like battle action, furious battle. They're basically just slugging it out. And there might be a little bit of context added, like you see a lot of Thor covers like that. Then there's a suspense that would come from a cover where you have equally matched combatants, where they're struggling, but neither one has the upper hand. And then, like I said earlier, last man standing, narrowly dodged bullet. There's lots of covers like that where a bullet's whizzing by and you're just like, it's very dramatic and draws you in. And I think, actually, wait, what does that remind me of? I'm wearing orange. Orange. A guy that just dodged. No. Is that a dramatic moment? Narrowly dodged bullet. That'll draw you in every time. Moving on, About to Die, the beleaguered hero. So that's like when you're cornered, you're at the bottom of a well. Spider-Man's got the crushing thing with the, wasn't that Ditko? With the water, the big water pouring down and the giant, like, immovable object, kind of like Atlas holding up the world. Then there's the covers like Held Captive, Trapped, Captured by Monsters, Hiding from Monsters, Lost with No Hope, A Faint Hope, Impossible Rescue, like Last Minute, Deus Ex Machina. So that's by no means all of the ones you could think of, but again, as a word game, you could, if you're stuck on something, you could make your own lists of these things by looking at covers. Ones that you think are good, like I think the older ones, Neal Adams, Joe Kubert, Kirby, Nick Cardy, there's all kinds of them that were just genius at doing this stuff. You could see that they understood that they always had to have something like this to draw you in. It wasn't enough to just show a cool drawing, a well-drawn drawing. I'll go back to my Kirby here. Yeah, so you've got, I'm going back to what I was saying earlier, which was how well he orchestrated all these different figures. Like, he's even put a bit of sort of interaction with Medusa using her hair, which is cool, to wrap this. She's got some kind of Kirby Gizmo batons. He was always big on clubs and batons that were like techno clubs. Is about to do something to the torch. And the rest of them are just kind of popped in because he had the problem of, like, you can't feature everything equally. So he's got Black Bolt as the main contender flying forward, about to do something probably to the torch, and Medusa's kind of secondary, and then the other, three are, you've got the other three kind of subordinate. And the copy here doesn't really add that much, but it's a nice graphic element to get some lettering. In this epic issue, that's not really necessary, but they just did that stuff at Marvel. The torch goes wild. And then in battle against the uncanny Inhumans. That might be for somebody that didn't know, the readers would know. Let's show this, like I said, Johnny Romita cover. This is interesting because and you can just do this endlessly with covers that you think are good, where there is a story moment. Try and break down why it works, how it's composed, how the composition helps deliver that in a really clear way to the viewer and from a distance. And another key tip is shrink your covers way down. I'm not doing that. Well, I guess I could do that here. I mean, see, it's still graphically powerful even when you shrink it way down. The components resolve clearly the way it's colored, and the way it's colored depends on the way it's drawn. But what have we got here? We've got copy that's put near the top under the title. So right away, we're going to read that first. On the Trail of the Chameleon. So he's hidden, and you've got this shadowy figure that's, again, like that symbolic kind of presentation, because it's not meant to be literally there. This is another example, like I said, with Mazzucchelli, of a mixed 50-50 literal and symbolic. The foreground with Spider-Man in this crowd is clearly a literal, real moment. He's got his spidey sense going off, and he's swinging at this crowd that's accusing him. They're pointing fingers at him. There's guns drawn by the cops, and they're all angry at him, yelling, and they're pointing, there he is, get him, which is hapless, Spider-Man always getting into this situation. So in the background, you've got this chameleon character laughing and mocking, which adds that third piece. You've got Spider-Man, you've got the surrounding crowd, which has been done around him as a nice big shape. And you've got him swinging, not only swinging in, but he's swinging his fist. And then you've got this other extra layer of context that he's being laughed at, poor Spider-Man. And it's like some kind of plot has come to fruition. Let's see what my last one was here. Oh yes, I did a little bit of analysis on this, and this is an Avengers cover by John Buscema. I guess, yeah, this will be my last one for sure, because I did go to the work of just monkeying with it, and no disrespect meant to John Buscema, but this is a useful thing to do, to analyze, and not to end on a sour note, because I think everything about this is great, except maybe the complication of it. So I don't think it's as successful a cover as some of the other ones. I guess I don't have to, hedge my words too much here, but I'm trying to explain for people who don't understand, you don't have to be either total fan adulation or say zero. Especially if you're a working artist, you need to develop this ability to analyze. So that's what I'm trying to show here. And you can even do it with our heroes. He's a art hero of mine, but like all of us working artists, you have good days and bad days. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily a bad day, but I just think the end result of this cover is too complicated and you're not really sure where to look. It's still very cool. The figure drawing's fantastic as ever with John Buscema, the inking, the coloring. It's all on point, but I think it's probably when they added the copy. I just don't agree with what they did. And you're not really sure where to look. Like the fact that this word balloon at the top is going over the logo is okay, and you read that first. So you've got this mini me guy here in his floating chair, which is cool. It's not MODOK, right? Who's that other one, with the floating chair? I guess that came from Kirby, right? But he's the brainchild. So he says, "You costume cretins won't stop brainchild from blowing up the world. No one will." And then the Vision's saying, "He's gone mad. He's out to destroy himself and take the whole planet with him." Now you'll see my critique is that for a lot of things called iPass, it's very confusing. Like, you don't know where to look. These balloons are all competing for your attention. And I find all the components kind of too equal, even though, as I keep saying, a lot of the components are cool and beautifully drawn figures. I love the way the Vision his hand is coming here over, what's this guy, Goliath is he called? Again, Marvel guys kill me, but I don't remember. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are falling down. They're being zapped by his brainwaves. It's all great. But I just find it too busy and it's hard to look at. And this might be quibbling, but again, I'm talking about this so that you understand the process of fine-tuning something. I think this now could be different. Now, I don't know if what I did is necessarily better. This is where my viewers, I'm sure in the comments, will tell me. But what I did here is I used Photoshop's fill-in capability to, I chopped out the balloons and the brainchild guy, and then I just quickly filled in the background so we wouldn't have gaps. And then I made brainchild bigger. I'm trying to see if that would help. I think it does help a bit, even though you might have a scale problem because I'm not sure if he's meant to be actually miniature. But this would just kind of move him up. And I'm not blaming John Buscema, by the way, because he probably just drew this and didn't know what kind of copy they'd put on this thing. But anyway, here he is a little bigger, and then I moved the word balloons around. These two to go in a row, and so that it's again covering the logo a little bit too much. You could probably move this down a bit, but I'm not presenting this as some pure, perfect solution. I'm presenting this as an example of what you can do on your own work as you're doing sketches or building things in layers. I do it constantly every day that I'm working on things. If I'm doing it digitally, or even in sketches, I'm still doing it with little sketches and redrawing them and flipping them over and drawing them back if it's real paper. Because I'm trying to find the optimal solution. You've only got that piece of paper, that cover here. It's a two-dimensional surface. You can't have everything featured. So particularly when it gets more complex like this, you have to figure out how to present it and present the idea clearly. And I would say it is much harder to do these kinds of covers well than to do just a pin-up and slap a big title on the top, or a small title, or a poorly placed title. Anyway, you've got him saying, the way I did it here is to connect the balloons and reduce the, let me just show you here. Yeah, like, and I'll click back and forth here. See, that was the earlier one, and this is the second one. So you costume cretins won't stop brainchild from blowing up the world, and you would read this much more quickly and find it because of this little cross connector. No one will, and that could even maybe be bigger as long as it didn't impinge on the logo. And then Vision is saying, he's gone mad, he's out to destroy himself. I think that's a little easy to read. I only moved it a bit because of the fact that I moved brainchild up, so it's not that different. Another major thing I did is I made the bottom one bigger, actually, and take the whole planet with him, because that's important. It's more important. So, and take the whole planet with him is like the punchline, but in the original one, I find it gets completely lost. because maybe they didn't want to cover up this beautiful drawing, which, it's a shame to cover up the beautiful drawing, but in terms of this kind of cover delivering the story content, you really need it. So I'd argue maybe that's a little better, but again, as I end up here, I'm really presenting this just to show you, like, don't take things you do as completely fixed until you're really super satisfied with it. But if you want to improve it, you've got to learn to play variations. Think of it as fluid or malleable. You're moving stuff around. You're redrawing stuff. That's another thing that beginners often aren't willing to do, is think of their work as fluid. Like, don't get married to one sketch or one version of something. And it can be hard to do if you think, oh, I love this. But sometimes the solution is just, you got to just throw out the baby, your treasured thing that you think is so great. And it sometimes is the obstacle to the actual, improvement of your work. You see this in movies where sometimes they'll cut out entire sequences, like whether it's like older directors like The Godfather or current ones. Current example doesn't come to mind, but I know that there's many famous movies where you go into movie history and they have whole sequences that they shot, and they're beautifully acted, and they have to cut them out. I saw Kevin Costner on a podcast talking about one of his movies. I forget which one, but he said there's a whole 10-minute sequence that was fantastic. They were begging the director not to cut it, but he had to cut it because it wasn't a studio dictating it. It was the fact that in the flow of the story, it just interfered and it stopped what was developing and finishing up. I think it was in the latter part of the movie. But it's really a similar thing with things like covers or in a story, deciding what pages to leave in and out, because sometimes you have something beautifully drawn or a beautiful component, but it can be the thing that's like causing the sticking point, and it's distracting. So yeah, that's what I tried to show here with monkeying with John Buscema's beautiful work here. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you like the video, please give me a comment, a like, a follow, and even a share. And I hope that was useful to people who are studying covers and artists on the way up, or wherever you are in your art journey, up Art Mountain, as I like to say. So thank you.